Hello everybody, World Class Wizard here with more insights into the true nature of the cosmos. This is my second video where I am sharing my personal philosophy of Neopragmatism with the world, in the hope that it might affect some positive change. In my last video I defined what I believe are the first and second most serious problems faced by the human race today: psychotic leaders and the widespread belief in social constructivism. The only thing worse than a psycho is a psycho who believes human nature is a social construct. If you haven't seen that video, I urge you to do so before watching this one. Tonight I will be explaining my philosophy in greater detail. Previously, I offered a solution to the problem of psychotic world leaders. I suggested that in view of the fact that testing people for psychosis while running a PET scan, a brain scan displaying the real-time activity of the brain as it happens, would reveal virtually all psychotics. This sort of test is practically foolproof. Of course, testing all our politicians and public servants would need to be legally mandated. I expected and got the usual objection that any game can be rigged. This was certainly true in the past, but a world where techs at MIT actually record dreams as people dream them is a world where foolproof games can be designed. But I encountered an objection which I did not anticipate and find much more disturbing. It seems that many people consider this solution to be evil because it represents an expansion of government power. And of course, any government power is inherently evil, isn't it? On the other hand, I consider my proposal to be the most effective check on the power of government imaginable. It seems there are a very large number of social constructivists out there who believe government as such is evil and totally unnecessary. I say they are without a doubt social constructivists because they believe humans can be programmed to refrain from doing harm to their fellow citizens. Humans are apex predators. Killing is literally in our genes. For most of our existence, it was only the very best killers that survived to reproduce. So we have evolved into very efficient and in many cases enthusiastic killers by nature. We have been naturally selected for this since the dawn of time. We are not merely apex predators, we are pack predators. Long before the dawn of human consciousness, our hominid ancestors ran in packs, just as wolves and a host of other animals do today. Animal packs have leaders and a dominance hierarchy wherein all members of the pack must obey the rules of the pack or be killed or exiled. Government is a naturally evolved concept, not just a social construct. We have had and needed government since long before we became fully human. The neo-pragmatist position on government is that government is a human necessity. Our nature demands it. The philosopher's job is to design the best government possible and not to encourage well-meaning people to waste their time trying to abolish government. It might be an interesting hobby, but other than that, trying to abolish government serves no useful purpose. Every decrease in government power is not necessarily good, and every increase in government power is not necessarily evil. The power to screen psychos out of public service would be an example of a very good increase in government power. I have come under much criticism for my advice to my friends and allies in nationalist China in my video, KMT Stand Tall. In particular, people are horrified by my suggestion that the Kuomintang Party, which controls the national government, should raise the voting age to 30 for the purpose of disenfranchising their opponents. What a fascist, anti-democratic thing to suggest, they say. Don't you believe in democracy? Sir Winston Churchill said, democracy is the worst form of government, except for all those other forms that have been tried from time to time. He also said, the best argument against democracy is a 5-minute conversation with the average voter. No, I do not worship democracy. We must remember that Adolf Hitler was elected Chancellor of Germany by a democracy. Mark Twain was fond of saying that anytime you find yourself in agreement with the majority, it is time to pause and reflect. The ancient philosophers thought democracies were doomed to failure because sooner or later the people would discover that they could vote themselves bread in circuses. Democracy is certainly a step forward in the evolution of government, but a truly stable, rational form of democracy has yet to be designed. In the case of nationalist China, ethical principles trump political principles. The DPP party is intent on declaring independence from China. This would result in the destruction of the Nationalist Republic of China and the loss of hundreds of thousands of lives, because the communists have made it very clear that they will attack if the ROC declares independence. Frankly, there just aren't many things I would not do to avoid such an outcome. Neopragmatist ethics is based on the standard of human life, in total agreement with objectivism, the philosophy of Ayn Rand on this point. That which preserves human life and supports the sort of life appropriate to human happiness is ethical. Anything else is evil. Politically, I support the sort of limited franchise representative democracy that Robert Heinlein described in his book, Starship Troopers. And I do mean Heinlein's book, not the movie, which corrupted and subverted most of the message of Heinlein's book, even though it was quite entertaining. People should be required to demonstrate some civic virtue before being allowed any say in the governance of a nation. Citizenship should be earned, not given. A lot of my friends and associates are also saying that if I'm going to give advice to my KMT brothers, I should also advise the American people on how to straighten up our government. The first step is in identifying the government. The first step is figuring out who the government actually is. The show in Washington is just theater designed to prevent you from ever knowing who your real rulers are. I'll give you two good examples from the left and from the right. The left is terrified of appearing weak on fighting the enemies of the U.S. In their political campaigns, they promise they will be tough on our enemies and defeat them. So they perpetuate an utterly useless and prohibitively expensive war in Afghanistan. This war ultimately does not help the Afghan people, and it certainly does not benefit the American people in any way. But it does allow the left to put on a good show for the American people, aimed at proving they are tough on terrorism. And, more importantly, it puts large sums of money into the pockets of their defense contractor supporters. The war in Afghanistan is just for show. It is a theatrical performance aimed at deceiving the American people. A much more glaring example of this is the president's habit of ordering drone attacks all over the world. Even our allies deeply resent such violations of their airspace. which erodes our relationship with them. Every time Obama orders one of these mafia-style hits on a terrorist, the strike inevitably kills many civilians, and usually the majority are children. Each one of these strikes is a powerful recruiting tool for our enemies. It is a psychological warfare nightmare. These strikes harm the U.S. far more than they inconvenience our enemies. The only reason we are still in Afghanistan and still conducting drone strikes is to put on a show for the American people, to move more money into the coffers of the military-industrial complex. A truly great Republican president, President Dwight Eisenhower, warned us about this in the 1950s. Now, 60-plus years later, all his fears have been fully realized, and we deserve it, because we did not listen to the greatest military strategist of the modern era. The price of freedom is eternal vigilance, and the American people have been asleep at the switch. What about the Republicans of today? Are their leaders and politicians as wise as Eisenhower? No. In fact, Eisenhower would not recognize them as being Republicans at all. I think even Lincoln would change his party affiliation and start a new party if he could see the Republicans of today. And by the way, Jack Kennedy would probably join Lincoln, given how equally disgusting the Democrats of today have become. I gave two examples of Democrat insanity theater, so I will give two examples of the Republican version. The Republicans refused to fund the government, causing the nation's credit rating to be downgraded and thus costing taxpayers billions of dollars in higher interest rates on our debt. Why would people who claim to want the government to spend less money do something to increase the government's rate of spending? It was theater for their base, just a show for Republican voters, and they thought they could blame it on the Democrats. The Republicans also tried over 50 times to repeal Romneycare. I mean, let's be honest, it was Romney's idea originally. It's just not fair to allow Obama to take credit for it. Republicans have wasted large amounts of time and effort neglecting the real business of government, trying to do something which they knew was utterly and completely impossible so long as President Obama held office. These are people who virtually all have degrees in constitutional law or political science. Why did they neglect the business of government, trying to do something they knew for a fact had zero chance of success? It was only theater for their base, just a show to keep Republicans happy with their valiant representatives. Yes, folks, here in the United States, we have the very best politicians money can buy. They put on a great show for the American people, but they don't actually do anything they promise to do. And that is because the people who bought them dictate what they must do. You see, when you buy a government, you become the real government. And our government is bought and paid for. On the left and the right, virtually all politicians are bought and controlled by some wealthy special interest. There are lots of practical things we could do to change this if we had statesmen in Washington rather than politicians who are bought and paid for. We could outlaw lobbying, put upper limits on the amount of money anyone can contribute to a political campaign, limit the amount of time candidates can campaign for political office, mandate that government must use 10% of all annual revenue to pay down the principal on our national debt and not just make interest payments. We could pass a law making it very clear that corporations are not people. This crazy notion is very destructive. If corporations were people, then IBM could run for president with Google as its running mate. Oh, yes, if we only had statesmen like Jefferson, Washington, and Hamilton who actually cared more about their country than their personal masters and personal advancement, we could put an end to most of the madness. We could stabilize America and make it strong in the long term. If we had statesmen in Washington. So the American people need to ask themselves when they vote if they are voting for a statesman or voting for a politician. We must demand an opportunity to have statesmen nominated so we can vote for them. Please do not deceive yourself into believing that your favorite representative is a statesman. There are no statesmen serving in Washington today unless they are new there. Everybody who has been there more than one term is connected to some fashion of the military-industrial complex. Please remember that it was the Supreme Allied Commander, General Eisenhower, who first identified this enemy and warned us about it. The military-industrial complex is not a conspiracy theory. It is and has been an observable fact since the time of President Eisenhower. The military-industrial complex is the machine which controls national politics, and the people who own that machine are your actual rulers, and I do mean rulers, not representatives. The government in Washington is the power supply to this machine which enslaves us all. In order for the American people to regain control of our country, we must cut that machine's power supply. So how do we do that? We reset the system by throwing every incumbent out of Washington. All of them. Fill Washington with people who have no ties to the military-industrial complex. Cut the machine's power connection. Throw them all out at the same time and send new people who have no connection to the military-industrial complex. Send statesmen to Washington rather than politicians, and you will see much better governance. Do write-in campaigns if you can't get good people nominated. Don't support any candidate endorsed by any political party. And please elect people who actually know how to negotiate with opponents to get things done. If neither side of the aisle will compromise on anything, then nothing gets done, except backdoor deals to enrich the elites. Throw all these political actors out and reset the system with statesmen who have no ties to the elites. Believe me when I tell you, nothing of any substance will change until we do this. Surely we can all agree to work on this together. The elites have divided us in order to conquer us. To defeat them, we must all unite behind this single cause. It is time for all Americans to remember the words of Benjamin Franklin. If we do not hang together, we shall surely hang separately.